Hey everyone, we're at CES 2020 at the Lian Li suite now, where my nemesis, Roman, aka Der Bauer, has once again had his hand involved in some of the case designs at the show here. We'll be talking about the O11 Mini. So there's a new version of the O11 Dynamic that's smaller. It is interesting because it's semi-modular, so it supports three different, well, the three main motherboard form factors. So we'll cover that. The Unifan that was shown off in one of the shows we did last year that actually had a lot of interest from viewers. It was just a prototype at the time, but now there's actually, it looks like a go-to-market prototype that we'll be talking about. And then there's a Lancool II revisit with mesh that I think our viewers will also find very interesting. So that's what we're covering at the Lian Li suite today. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Gigabyte X299X Designari high-end motherboard. The Gigabyte X299X Designari runs Intel's X299 chipset for HEDT CPUs, but this board stands out most for its properly finned VRM heat sinks and cooling solution, and its focus on networking with dual 10 gigabit Ethernet alongside Wi-Fi 6 802.11ax support. Learn more at the link in the description below. All right, so for the O11 Dynamic Mini, we'll start here. The three cases on the table, it's all the Dynamic Mini, except they are configured differently. So ATX, micro-ATX, mini-ITX, and the part where Roman comes in, I'm pretty sure the only thing he contributed to this case was putting his logo on it. No, I think if Roman were here, he'd probably take issue with what I just said. But basically, the logo cut out at the front here instead of just being a stamp, it's got the two names so Lian Li shows up, Der Bauer shows up, and then there's also a temperature readout. Now, functionally, does it do a whole lot other than allowing them to split royalties between each other? No, but the temperature readout's not bad. It's kind of interesting. This is one of those small case changes where we've kind of talked about this at the show a lot recently, but companies are trying to find ways to differentiate themselves with cases, and a lot of the time that leans more into making a gimmick than not. So one of the things I do like about this setup is that there's a thermocouple attached that can give you case ambient temperature. We've done case ambient temperature readings before in our case reviews, and I can tell you from experience, as Lian Li also knows, where you move the probe will massively impact the temperature. So how useful is it for the average user? Maybe not so much, but this is one of the smaller case features that I do like to see because it's more than just doing more LEDs. So there's potential for functionality there. If you really position it carefully and you fix the position for the thermocouple, you can actually do some comparative numbers for your case ambient, which typically in our experience is more useful for figuring out the ramp up, ramp down times for temperature, because when you're dealing with completing a load and exhausting all the heat, you'll have a longer ramp down period for smaller cases. So it could be kind of useful for that. Otherwise, it's just sort of a neat feature that changes the case without being too much of a gimmick like a lot of the other cases we've seen lately are. So that was kind of cool. It's a thermocouple that's included. You position it where you want, and that's more or less the end of the story for that. For the configurations, so like I said, this one's the most showy one. There's an ITX one we can show too, but this one's configured with ATX. To get ATX or micro-ATX support, there is a separate piece of metal here that extends the motherboard tray so that they have the mounting space for it without having to just do a completely new motherboard tray. For the rear of the case, that's all modular. You'll get all the pieces in the box so you can set it up how you want. I don't know yet what the stock configuration will be, but it doesn't matter too much because you can just change it if you want to. So for micro and ATX, you add in the plate kind of back there where the 24 pin is on this build, and then for mini, you don't need it there. You get additional grommets and cable routing holes instead. For configuration and support, as would be expected, the larger the motherboard, the more you lose support on other items in the case, like cooling solution. So for the total configurations, sizing, it's about 37 liters roughly, more or less. So it is definitely a large ITX case. It's for sure on the high end. You can get much smaller ITX cases if you want to. But I suppose the point of this is that it gives you some water cooling options, but also the O11 Dynamic name that I think at this point has earned the respect it has in the market, and that's more or less what they're targeting. So it's not trying to be the smallest ITX. For support, the mini version will support up to 3 280s. The micro can do a 280 on the top, 240 on the side and the bottom. The ATX version is 240 side or 240 on the maybe on the side. There's no top radiator support because it's increasing the motherboard height, so that's a limitation, but you can still get the fans up there as is seen in this build. And then for pricing, it's looking like $90 to $100, not 100% confirmed yet, but that's what it's supposed to be, and no fans included stock. So, which is kind of a standard Lian Li thing. You can choose your own fans. I think I've mostly covered these. Like I said, it's not the smallest ITX case you could do, but you can do a lot in it, like this liquid cooling setup. And otherwise, it's more or less O11 Dynamic look and feel, just with some modularity added to it. So let's see. I think I got all this stuff. Let's move on to the Lancool II Mesh. Okay, so next, the Lancool II Mesh. This one's interesting. We just reviewed the Lancool II not long ago, and it's a bit more closed off in the front for sure. One of the things that we were talking about with it was thermals were average to below average sometimes. So if you liked the look, cool. You can compensate for it with higher airflow fans, higher RPM fans, liquid cooling, whatever. There's a lot of ways to compensate. But if you prefer more of a performance focus, this should solve some of those concerns. And the obvious way is by punching a bunch of holes in the panel for the front and for the sides, both sides actually, to the extent that the case is probably more hole than metal at this point, which is good. We like to see that. One interesting thing for making this, maybe we can show this in a future factory tour, but we've visited Lian Li's factories in the past. We went to one in Taiwan, and we've got a video up on that if you're interested in it. But the way to make this specific type of paneling is, I guess they get the raw material supply, the metal, and then there's a wheel, more or less a rolling wheel, that's got a bunch of spikes on it, and they roll through it and punch all the holes. So pretty cool, but we can maybe show that in a future factory tour. It works the same way as the Lancool II. I should note the LEDs here are not stock, so you would have to add those if you wanted to add them. For some changes that are not shown in this prototype, it's not complete yet, but some of the changes they're talking about doing in addition to the mesh front and the mesh sides is also making this, I don't really know, it's not really mesh, but the punched hole top of the power supply shroud, potential to making the fan mounts removable plates. So if you wanted to occupy it with the fan, you take the plate and the metal out. And if you don't want the fan in there, you can leave it in there, and just let the GPU graft whatever passive air can pull out of there. But pulling the plates out will obviously remove one more object of impedance for airflow, and that would be a potential flow benefit for fans if you did power supply mounted fans, where in this instance, now that there's so many holes in the side, they should be able to pull a bit of air through the side and up through there into the GPU. We can test all that though once we get one in. Other changes, I think we have shots of all this. We also have some renders from Lian Li to show for the change potential. But for another one that was under discussion, the holes in the top and in the back of the case, it looks like we'll be moving to a honeycomb design. So this is something where after doing more thermal testing, Lian Li has discovered that honeycomb pattern performs better for them for thermal performance than this pattern you see here. So this will probably change for the final version, and that's a result of more thermal testing, which is great. Love to see companies actually trying their products in different configurations, because you'd be shocked how many don't, and we get it, and we do the first testing on it. So that's also good improvement pathway for Lian Li on this case. Additional items, I've got a couple notes here. So one of the changes not shown on this version of the case, the pre-production version, is that the top here on the left side of the power button should be changing over to fan control. So it'll have probably 4 positions, and it's PWM fans included. So you've got 4-pin with a tack, obviously, on the 4th. And the 4th position should be PWM, so it slaves to the motherboard. And then the first 3 will be different fan RPMs. They're looking at doing probably 800 to 1500 RPM. Not 100% certain on that yet. Sounds like black and white fans, no RGB, so you're not wasting money on that as a consumer. If you want to buy your own, you can. Obviously, no LED is stock for the case. If you wanted LED control, you can wire it to the reset button and sacrifice the reset button for that, which Patrick and I, our case reviewer, we prefer that solution because then there's no software involved. And let's see, for pricing, this is where probably most people are going to be interested. It looks like it should stick to about $90. And for the fans included, it's probably going to be 3 120s. Might be 3 140s, depends on final testing, but 3 fans included, 2 front, 1 back. Let's see, I think that covers this one. So that's the Lancool II Mesh. And now the Lancool 315 here. So the 315, it's got 2 versions. There's a glass and a mesh version. The mesh is the one next to me. There's a glass one as well. Just tempered glass in the front, pretty straightforward standard stuff. For the The most interesting element is going to be actually really obvious. Can you see me okay, Andrew? Is this a good shot for you? Am I showing up? So there's a removable tray here with the item of note, I guess, is it removes with the radiator in place. We've seen removable trays before. They're not too common in cases, but we've got B-roll shots. You just grab the handle, pull it out, push it back in. This is another one of those things in cases where is it a daily useful thing for the buyer of the case? Well, no, probably not. But it's cool and it's different. And to do something cool and different in a case that's not just more LEDs, that's something I look for. But that's the main feature of the 315 is the removable tray for board. You can build the whole thing out of the case for the most part, including mounting the radiator. And that's the main difference for that one. For pricing, it's targeted at $80. And it looks like there might be one fan in the back, but not fully finalized on that stuff. And I think now we can move to the Unifan, which I think it was at Computex 2018, I actually showed those and they were prototypes. Lian Li wasn't even sure if they were going to come to market, but now it sounds like it's going to happen. So we'll check that out next. All right, so here's the Unifan. Again, showed prototype previously. This one, so it sockets all together. It's got a really good click to it now. Lian Li needs to do some connection cycle testing on the pins. So it's pin to pad contact. The whole idea is that you socket the fans together instead of not doing that, and you end up with a bunch of extra cables. So this way you end up with one cable run at the end. There's obviously going to be an amperage limitation depending on the wire gauge and the current of the fans and all that stuff. They've tested it up to 6. I don't really know that it's supposed to support more than that, but tested up to 6 fans connected, daisy chained, and it's 6 pins and pads between each one. And then for those, the cables that run off, there's a 4-pin PWM for the fan. So PWM currently is going into a controller just for this testing setup. And then for the LEDs, you've got a separate cable run for that as well. So I guess, as everyone knows, LEDs aren't really our focus, but there's still some cool stuff going on. This meteor effect, we've got, I think, some B-roll of it. I'm not going to try and do this live because I'll cut my fingers off since I'm holding a mic. But if you disconnect and add fans to it, it'll do the meteor scrolling while you're adding. Again, is that particularly useful? You're not going to be disconnecting fans while you build? No, but the real point of it is to show that if you daisy chain a bunch of fans together, they've got the interaction where you get a bunch of them in a line and they can follow a pattern, right? So if that's your thing, cool. One of the other you could set all these fans to the meteor effect and it would actually scroll outward that way as well into the other fans. But yeah, so that's the Unifan. The whole point is just quick disconnect, daisy chained fans. Pretty straightforward stuff. I don't know the amperage. I did ask what the current was. We'll have to get back on that. RPM max looks like about 1800. You have your usual plus or minus about 10% for that off the top. And then availability probably in April. And then for pricing, it should be $70 or $80 for a set of 3. And keep an eye out for that in April. So one other thing too I'll mention just really quickly, there's a new version of the Streamer cable, Streamer Plus. And we didn't cover the original too much. We showed it back at one of the Computex events. But this is, it's 100% on the look side of things. If you like LEDs and you want them in your cables, then Lian Li's got that. It is expensive though. $60 for 24-pin, and then $40 for the 2x8-pin connectors for those. Anyway, that's Lian Li's suite at CES 2020. For things that our takeaways, the GN takeaways, will be to look at the Lancool II Mesh, obviously. The Lian Li O11 Mini is also really interesting to me because it supports ATX, so we could still do some thermal testing on that. But I'm most interested in the Lancool too because it's made some really good changes that I'm excited to hopefully try out, and we'll see how they do in thermal testing. But that's it for this one. Subscribe for more as always. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly. And keep an eye out because I'm supposed to be joined by Dare Bauer later in the show. So I'll make sure to let him know that I think he's just a big diva. So you can check back for that. I think we're meeting him mid-show on the middle of the show floor too. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time.